research at Georgia Tech. And in lieu of Dr. Hyman, who is on a beach someplace, actually, I don't know where he is, but he's not in his office. So I'm going to be introducing our speaker this afternoon. Professor Molinaro is the Assistant Vice Provost for Educational Effectiveness and the Director for Center for Educational Effectiveness at UC Davis. He has more than 20 years of educational experience creating and leading technology applications for instruction, scientific visualization and simulation, curriculum development, evaluation, and science exhibits for students from elementary school through graduate school and for the general public. Rather than reading the rest of his bio, which you can find online, I want to give him as much time as possible. He just told us that he has a sharp deadline at in an hour, basically. So for him, I guess it would be 3 o'clock, and for the rest of you, depending where you are, it's an hour from now for 59 minutes. So with that, Professor Molinaro, the floor is yours, and we look forward to the presentation.
Thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to come talk to you guys. I'm going to take this relatively informally, so I really encourage you, if you have questions, to go ahead and interrupt and ask. I will try to monitor the chat, but if you can help me, is it Chauki? You can help me.
Yes, that's good.
That would be fantastic.
Sure.
As sometimes I may get carried away and not see something getting from the chat, but it's a pleasure to be here talking with you. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about how we approach fostering and supporting a data-informed, student-centered institution. And as Chauki mentioned, I am at the University of California, Davis, and Assistant Vice Provost for Educational Effectiveness. I also help organize the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning community, and am a member of Seismic, which is a 10-institution collaborative that's looking at really outcomes data related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues around 10 different Research One institutions, especially in introductory STEM. So I'll be bringing some of that data. Oh, Greg is here. He must be at an airport.
I don't know. He looks
between flights at an airport.
Looks like he's in a hotel.
Oh, we can't hear him. But
now I can hear you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you guys harassed? Were you harassing me?
Yeah, we were saying good on the beach.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. No, I didn't mean to interrupt your talk. I'm so sorry. But I did want to hear some of it.
No problem. Are you in an airport? Is that
I'm in an airport. Yeah, I am for about 15 minutes. So I just
okay. Great. I'll go super fast. No, just kidding.
No. Take your time, and thank you for giving this talk. I really appreciate it.
Excited to be here. Okay. So first of all, I just wanted to give you a context. I don't know if this context resonates with what's happening at the University of Arizona, but there has been a big push to improve four-year graduation rates at our institution and in our system, our University of California system. And what they started to look at is during the time of trying to improve those four-year graduation rates, we also want to remove the inequities between the graduation rates of different groups. And this visual here just shows you the difference between the four-year graduation rate for our non-minoritized students versus the four-year graduation rate for our minoritized students. And it shows you the comparison of all the UC, University of California schools. And as you can see, we are in the non-enviable position of having the largest gap between these two four-year graduation rates. And this is the context into which the type of work that I'm going to be talking to you about is trying to make a difference and trying to bring attention to what's happening and trying to help focus resources. Okay, so one thing that we've learned early on was that we need to think about a cycle in which we utilize data and data tools. When we first started out about now, gosh, almost 10 years ago, we were delivering reports or delivering, a visualization, and that was helping a lot with awareness, right? People were getting a new awareness of what was happening within our university, and then they would immediately jump to an action. They would do something, and then they'd ask for data again, and they probably wouldn't get what they wanted, and they'd have a new awareness, and we just keep bouncing back between awareness and action. What we decided to try was to put in a step of like trying to understand what that awareness and what that data might be telling you, and what do other people also know about similar situations, and what can we bring in from the literature How can we make sense of what we're seeing? How can we ask deeper questions and have a deeper understanding before we go into an action? And then once we've taken an action, how do we analyze the outcomes of that action? And taking those outcomes in, how can we reflect on what we want to do next so that we can come to a new awareness? So we started to try to build into all of the things that we're doing this cycle. Now, I'll be right up front with you all. We rarely make it all the way around. Okay. And what I mean by that is the analysis section usually bogs people down, or they don't want to engage in reflecting what they actually learned, or the leadership changes and someone else wants to do something different. So some things have gone through the cycle, but some things have not. And we're okay with that, but we try to always keep this in mind. And the thing I want to point out that we use this cycle, whether we're talking to an individual faculty member thinking about their course, whether we're looking at a curriculum or a course sequence, or whether we're looking at a whole department or even the university. So we're trying to utilize this kind of process whenever we engage in any kind of data focused type of approach or tool. We think about this because we really think one person's actions can spread awareness and understanding, a group expands, the system lingers, right? Fundamentally, we want things to work better. So with that said, we also made a real big mistake early on by just focusing on a student deficit model. The student deficit model was then replaced by an instructor deficit model. And these two really did not work. They were straightforward and easy to think about, but they did not work. And so what we're really at now is a course or system improvement model. That's really where we've landed and where we put all of our energy into. And I want to point out that in trying to think about course and system improvement models, there's we at times will use this framework, the four frames framework for change agents. And we think about, what are the structures that make things happen in the way they do? What are the symbols? How is data playing a role in decision making? What's the power hierarchies? Who gets to make the decisions? Who has the power? And again, the people who can even be involved in thinking about the problem. And when we think about that, we realize that there's lots of different players at the university and beyond and outside the university. So the majority of our work is with instructors, course level things, department level things, college, and then campus level. This is the area where we focus with the majority of our work at instructor, course, and department level. So a lot of the things I'll be showing you today are in that area, but we've come to realize that there's a lot of things that affect how the data will be interpreted, how the data will be thought of, and what impact it might actually have. Any questions so far?
Makes sense.
Okay, so I'm going to be showing an example from each of these three areas. So we think about tools and visualizations and approaches at the college university leadership level. We think about the level of department leaders, and we think about the level of faculty thinking about their own courses and classrooms. And these are really individual actions all the way to systemic. And everything that we try to build is designed to be usable at scale. So we don't want it to, if we make something for one instructor, we don't want it to just work for that instructor. We're trying to figure out how can we take that work and expand it so it can be used by all of our 2,000 plus instructors. Okay, so I'll start with the highest level here, college university leadership, seeing the big picture. Now, we've been, I don't know about you guys, but at Davis, for the longest amount of time, we thought, okay, let's look at how minoritized students do compared to non-minoritized students do, or first-generation students compared to non-first-generation students, or low-income students compared to non-low-income students. And we always saw somewhere around a third of a GPA difference for each of those comparisons. And to be honest with you, when people were looking at it, they're like, a third of a grade, it's not that bad. Why are we so worried? Well, we started to put things together and we started to look at things in different settings. And what you see up here is the average GPA outcomes for our California, 3 entering freshman classes put together of California residents, which are about 80% of our students. And what you're looking at is their outcomes in after the first year in terms of GPA, average GPA, for in red, the not first generation or low income, in blue, the first generation or low income, and in this orangish yellow color, the students that are first generation and low income. So we immediately see that there's an average of 2.8 all the way up to a little bit over 3.2. So, okay, you're seeing 0.4 difference. When we then focus that on what is their experience in the top enrollment courses, which in this case, we look at the top 10, 8 of those are STEM introductory courses, like your introductory math, your introductory chemistry, your introductory biology. And then we also looked at introductory psychology and introductory English. What you see is that separation of outcomes, everybody goes down and they separate further, where now between the first gen and low income students here around 2.4 and the others around 3.05, now we're over a half a grade difference. Okay, so you look at that and you think, okay, this is interesting trend that you're seeing. Well, sorry, 1 second, I was having a little internet glitch here. When we then separate it by race and ethnicity, the picture gets quite more complex. There's a lot more going on. And so what we started to see, well, let me ask you, what do you see when you look at this? Feel free to put something in the chat or speak up to you. And if you don't understand what I'm showing you, feel free to ask as well. Sorry,
inequity. I see inequity.
Yep, disparities vary by minoritized group. Anything else?
Very low Black African American population.
Yeah, the size of the group, the size of them changes, right?
The size of them changes, and what you see is in our white population, the predominant population is not first generation or low income. In our Hispanic population, the predominant population is first gen and low income. And this population is quite large. And here it kind of varies between the 3 groups, but there's these imbalances. The other thing I'll note is, again, all of the scores are lower. These scales are the same between these 2 graphs. And you see 2.8 here is just a reference. You'll see that everything has moved down quite substantially at times. And now you're looking at the difference here between this group here or this group here of 2.2 all the way up to almost 3.2 for this group. So now you're talking about some of the differences are as big as a whole grade when you're looking at these top 10 enrollment courses. And even when you're looking up here, there's still substantial differences. The other things that I notice is that our first gen low income students, no matter what their race and ethnicity, are struggling in these top 10 enrollment courses. Maybe not quite as much over here, but there's still some difference. But when you look over here, there's definitely in these top courses, which, by the way, 9 out of those 10 courses are taught in class sizes of 200 to 600.
Yep.
Okay, except for the Intro-English course, taught very large, first experiences for our first-time freshmen, and it's a difficult situation. So if I were to leave it here, some of the things I heard, I've heard is, oh, okay, this is obvious. To make the university work better, don't take in any first-gen and low-income students. Okay, now I don't know about you guys. You're a state institution, just like we are. We help the students in our state. That's our mandate. We're here for the students, and we're already lucky enough that we're getting the top. UC Davis is about the top 6 to 8% of the students in California by regional, high school district. So we're already getting the kind of the best of the best students from around the state. And then, we're not going to say, oh, well, we can't take you because you happen to be first gen and low income. That just doesn't work. It's not the ethos of the university. We're here to help everyone here succeed. Okay. So we wanted to understand more, right? This is awareness again. We wanted to understand a little bit more. So what we did is we said, okay, there's something here in another part of the university called our Center for Regional Change that had developed something called the Regional Opportunities Index, or ROI. And these are maps of California. That the redder means lower opportunity and the green means higher opportunity. And this is in terms of the location, and this is in terms of the people, this is in terms of the people in the area, the geographical area, and this is in terms of the place, the geographical place. And it looks at these variables. The people indicator look at things like education measures, economy measures, housing, mobility and transportation, health and environment, social political engagement. And in place, we looked at similar but different variables. And these are state published variables, and they were aggregated to create an ROI for the people and an ROI for the place based on census tract. Okay. So we said, okay, if we make the assumption that our California resident students, and that's why the other 2 graphs only showed you California resident students, if we make the assumption that the students have probably at least had 1 year in their at their permanent address. Okay, what does that tell us about the opportunity they had based on where they were and the people around them before they got to us? Okay, so we took that measure and we come up with this. We've added another dimension here, which is the average opportunity, regional opportunity index by census tract for the people that are in that census tract area, which is somewhere in 6,000 to 8,000 people are in a census tract. Okay, so now all of a sudden, do you guys see any kind of pattern?
Yeah.
Anyone want to comment on what pattern you see? Feel free to put it in the chat or speak up.
Can you clarify what the x-axis is again?
Yeah, so here it's a measure, it's the average regional opportunity index
Okay.
based on the student that is in that bubble, their permanent address. So it's giving us a sense of what is the prior opportunity of that student before coming to our campus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Easy. And so we see, sorry, go ahead. Oh, so you want to say something?
Well, that obviously, again, you know, they have lower opportunity. The lower the opportunity index, the less, I mean, they separate completely now, right? So you have the minority students or the first gen and the low income having lower ROI or lower, you know, this on the horizontal axis there to the left, and they separate it completely now. You know, there's much bigger gap.
Yeah, so fundamentally, you're seeing that almost all of our Black students and a vast majority of our Hispanic students on average are in this lower quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
Our Asian students will get less than half, and of our white students, very few,
Mm-hmm.
okay, are actually on average inside that quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively what's happened is the university has maintained prior
Mm-hmm.
opportunity, okay? Now, when you say that, it's not something that you feel very strongly and proud about, right? I mean, we've maintained the prior opportunity. I don't know about the way your institution, its narrative, but our institution's narrative is one of trying to really improve student possibilities and opportunities. And this is showing that it's not really happening, okay? On average, it's not really what's going on. And so it allows us to say, oh, wait a second, we've taken the best students out of each regional context, and there's really a difference in the opportunities they've had. What are we going to now do about it? How can we address this? Okay. So it kind of changes the framing rather than saying, oh, we just shouldn't have those first-gen low-income students. No, it's like students are doing the best to their abilities of the prior opportunity that they've had. So, you know, how can we intervene now and do something about it? So just for the sake of completeness, when we take smaller groups of students, I want you to realize that your opportunity, your regional opportunity does not dictate your GPA. It's an average trend. On average, the first-gen low-income students tend to be on the lower opportunity and on the lower scale of the GPA. But you have some students that have low opportunity and have done amazingly well and are first-gen low-income.
Sure.
So it doesn't, you know, it's not like you have a stamp and here's the number and that's it. That's what you're going to get as a GPA. It's, in general, it's a trend. And it's a disturbing trend when you look at the data aggregated together with averages. But individuals can overcome, or even individuals that have a lot of opportunity and are not first-gen or low income can do very poorly. You can have red dots on here. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Marco. So across groups, that's what you're seeing. Have you looked at within each group whether someone attended UC Davis or did not, whether things changed? And I don't mean the GPA now, right? I mean, I think what I'm trying to figure out is, you know, let's say someone did not go to college or went to another university from, let's say, from first gen, well, low income, let's say low income, you know, first gen would not apply in this case. Or if they went to another university, first gen, let's say, is the gap between, you know, what those two changed, or is it the same? Meaning, you know, I understand what you're saying. You know, you maintain the gap looking at the GPA as an outcome, but what if, you know, this person went elsewhere? Is UC Davis doing better or worse?
So, okay, it's a great question. It's a little bit of a tough question because we don't have a lot of
It is.
examples of students that come in one or go to the other. But what we did get to do is we
Right.
got to take advantage of having this collaborative with 10 other universities
Okay.
called
Okay.
Seismic. And so
Yeah.
now we took the 3 UCs, UC Santa
Got
Barbara,
it.
UC Irvine, and
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And when we look at that data, we look very similar.
Aha. Okay.
Okay. The difference is, and now you have campus B, campus C, campus D.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Separated again. The ROI measure on average is
Yeah, yeah.
here. And now
Yeah.
what you do see is you see one school where everybody seems to be doing better GPA wise in the top 10
Mhm.
enrollment courses.
Hmm.
And we've been trying to investigate what this might be from. And what we've seen so far is that these two schools, B and C, campus B and C, have a very similar 8 large STEM courses, intersectionality, and English as their top 10 enrollment courses for
Yeah. Yeah.
first year students. This one only has 6 STEM courses. It
Uh-huh.
has introduction to philosophy, introduction to mythology, psychology, and English.
Oh,
So
interesting.
this school does not emphasize nearly as much STEM as being, heavy first year STEM. So that's the first little indication that there's something probably to think about in the way we're teaching those introductory STEM courses.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's part of it. The other thing that we did is we also realized that for people that are not in California, because the Regional Opportunity Index was only for California, there's something called the Opportunity Atlas. And this is done here, which was done by Chetty at Harvard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be utilized. We utilize something called KIR. So that's a measure of income potential based on where you live, where you grew up. And we now put our campus against University of Michigan and Indiana Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing we saw was those 2 Midwest campuses are predominantly white serving institutions.
Of course.
Have fewer Asians, even fewer Hispanic students, and not somewhat similar Black African American students. Though what we did notice is in one of the 2 campuses, they have virtually no first gen and low income students or first gen or low income students. When they're looking at, for example, the Black students, they're predominantly first gen, not first gen nor low income. So we start to see that they're selecting students that have come from more opportunity to begin with.
Sure.
Okay, so it's an interesting concept. They still have the same problem with the GPAs being suppressed in those top 10 courses. So those STEM courses are still having the same effect there too. And this phenomenon seems to be holding steady. I would love to see it for University of Arizona. This is not a hard analysis to do. It would be wonderful to see, what things look like there. But anyway, so that's one thing that we've done. And what it's done is it's changed kind of the conversation around who's doing how and what might be leading to it. So it's kind of setting the playing field that now it's time to empathize with the students because they're doing the best they can given their prior opportunity.
Yeah.
The other thing that we coupled onto that is an understanding who leaves and when. So what we looked at is students who leave within the first 2 years. We lose about 14% of our African American students. We lose about almost 12% of our Hispanic students, 5% of our Asian students, and about 8% of our white students. When we look a little further and we say, are they not first gen, not low income? Are they first gen or low income? Are they first gen and low income? Or are we missing some of the factors? We see a picture where the more of these factors you have, the more likely you are to leave.
Yep. Yep.
And now I'm just going to change the width to talk to you about how many students it represents. And what you start to see is really we are most heavily losing in terms of real raw numbers, Hispanic, first gen low income students. And then, in terms of our Black population, which isn't that big to begin with, if you're first gen low income, we're losing 1 in 5 within the first 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's interesting, out of our Asian and white groups, where are we losing the most people in terms of numbers? Well, we're losing the ones that have come from the least factors.
Yeah.
They're not first gen, they're not low income. And what we've been looking at now is a national student clearinghouse to understand how many of these
Where
are
they're going.
upgrading.
Transferring. Yep.
And it sounds like that's something that you guys might have, versions of that as well. So that was interesting. So the question that came out of this was, well, these students are leaving because they're not doing well. Well, so first of all, we looked at exactly when they're leaving. We're on quarters, we're not on semesters. So what we realize is our first gen low income students, the heavy departure is in the first 3 quarters.
Mhm.
So the first year is really critical. Second year is still bad, but the first year is the most critical. And for all these groups, the first year is tends to be the most critical, except it's a little bit harder to tell for those with privilege. It seems to be a little bit more evenly spaced. But the first year also for our Black students, that's where we're losing the vast majority of them. So that first year becomes really important. And then we looked at, okay, if we were to look at, and now we've colored what their race ethnicity here, and we've put the first year GPA, and we've looked at those who stayed versus those who left, and looked at whether they are not first gen or low income, first gen or low income, first gen and low income. And what you see now is you see, yes, some of the students that are first gen and low income that are leaving were doing not so well GPA wise. That's true. But we still have people that were doing 1.8 and above after their first year. They're salvageable. There's things that we could do to keep these students. And there are plenty of students in some of these categories that are doing 2.8 or better that should still be, why are we losing them? What's going on, right? And so that's prompted a lot of work now in thinking about classroom inclusion and belonging and trying to understand if they feel like they fit here. Because you can imagine coming to the university, having that first year experience in those large STEM courses where you used to be doing really well at your high school, now you come here and you're getting a C or worse. That's a real slap in the face in terms of your feelings of like being able to be here. Anyway, so that's that kind of work, trying to understand what's happening to students and then who's leaving and why might they be leaving and what's going on with them. And if I were to look at this in terms of, this is all the students at the university. If I were to look specifically at just STEM majors, the problem would be at least twice as bad in terms of departure. Like the percentage is vastly overrepresented in STEM majors as compared to the non-STEM majors. Okay, so now let me move down to a group, to the department college level leaders. And here, what we've been trying to focus on is really how can we help decision making, help focusing resources. This is really important to us. So some of the tools that we introduced early on were things like this. This is the ribbon tool. It's available ribbon.ucdavis.edu if you want to use it for yourself with your own data. It's very straightforward Excel file. You can pop in there and see things, and then you can manipulate them and look at them. But what this shows is these are the students that in fall 2012 started in statistics. The next year, how many of them were statistics? Where did others come from? Where did some of them leave to? And then, all of a sudden you had this many enrolling in statistics at the beginning, you have this many graduating in statistics. And effectively, you have a 300, 400% retention rate if you were to just look at the numbers because of how many people you've gained. But in reality, you see kind of where the migrations happen. And in this tool, you can separate out by gender, you can separate out by different status, different combinations of status, freshmen, transfers, this is only freshmen, but you can do that and try to understand where the migrations might be happening. And I know Greg and I first met actually talking about different ways of doing this. That was one of the early things that we bonded over. The other thing that we've been doing is just trying to look at courses, thinking about first year, second year enrollment, and then trying to look at the students that are minoritized, first gen and low income, and looking at the outcome gaps between those that are minoritized, first gen and low income, and those that are none of those three factors. And what we start to see is that in some of our larger introductory courses, especially intro STEM courses, those gaps approach a full grade. And so when we look at that, we also think how many students received failing grades. We've also done, the famous DFs and Ws, withdrawals, measures, things of that nature. But the thing that we've been also adding into this is how big is that class normally in terms of what size is this taught at? And then one thing that's really we started to pay a lot more attention of is how much of this is this considered a service course? How many students in that course are the students that you feel belong to your discipline, right? I'm not even looking about your major. So let's look at chemistry, for example. The discipline that I'm saying is math and physical sciences. So in those introductory chemistry courses, 8 to 9% of those students actually are math and physical sciences majors, which means that 91+% are not math and physical sciences majors. They could be biology majors, they could be psychology majors, everything else in the university. But the way the courses are structured and conceptualized are for not even the math and physical sciences majors, they're conceptualized for the chemists. Okay, and I'm a chemist, so I can talk about this. I'm a chemist. That's how they're conceptualized. And then we wonder why there isn't that kind of real connection for the students in those introductory courses, and we have such a loss that comes out of poor outcomes in those courses, and then that translates into departure from the university. So it's just interesting. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're, like biology here, 44% of the students that take intro biology are going to be biology majors. Still, they still have a large gap. So it doesn't always translate. The thing that we've also noticed is the first course in a new area, disciplinary area, that the freshmen encounter is always the worst in terms of gaps. We had a natural experiment in biology where they allowed their first 3 courses to go in any order. And originally, the myth was the A course is the worst one. It always has the worst gaps. It's horrible. It gets so much better in B and C. Well, the moment they switched it and people were taking B and C first, then all of a sudden B or C became the worst course, just depending on where the first course was. Whoever took, the people who took it as their first course in biosciences, that was the worst that they did. So the reality is that it also seems like our students are having to face kind of a jolt when they take their first chemistry class, their first biology class, their first calculus class. They're getting used to what the expectations are. They're getting used to the way the language is. They're getting used to their peers in that field and how that field's been set up. And I don't know about Arizona, but in our institution, there's also many long-standing but hidden messages that, oh, that course is meant to get rid of the students that are not worthy to be in these courses. So there's kind of like tacit agreements that are kind of starting to be exposed, like, no, that's not the goal. This shouldn't be the goal of the course.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Marco, there's one question in the chat from Lou, who's a professor at Georgia Tech. He's asking, what is the difference between the multiple rows for the same course title or course number?
Oh,
course
yeah,
title.
Sorry. For the sake of trying to maintain some anonymity to what the courses are, these are courses in the same, usually it's a first-year sequence. These are courses that are within that sequence.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense?
So it could be general chemistry 1 and then general chemistry 2.
Yeah, and
okay.
I some of these I scrambled so you wouldn't automatically know that it's 1 and 2. It's just trying to keep some level of privacy the situation.
Okay, thank you.
And then I see, I am assuming it is different semesters or sections. Oh, okay, no, we just talked about it.
Okay,
it's different semesters. And then I see Tan Mei says, I know that certain CS courses at the University of Arizona are known as weed out courses. Oh, absolutely. We have those here too in CS. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But you do start to see that in courses, things like writing, advanced composition, the gaps are not nearly as dramatic, the grade gaps between these groups. And the reason why I pick these to calculate the gap in grades, because that's where we've seen the biggest difference. Okay, that's why I do that. In the deeper dives that we do, we also show, we look at things like, we call this one a socioeconomic and racial inequity kind of metric, but we also have one about language, so multilingual learners versus not multilingual learners, and then we have one based on gender differences.
So what do you see there in the multilingual, for example?
In the multilingual, I don't have it in this talk, but for example, there are some courses that there's definitely differences. Okay, so the mathematics courses, we see the multilingual learners in general doing better.
Yeah.
But the other thing to think about is we have some multilingual learners does not mean international automatically, right? Because we also have a very large population from Mexico that is born in the US, but their
Right.
primary language is Spanish.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of those scenarios as well. What we do tend to see is even courses like psychology can create some issues of language.
Yeah.
Courses that rely a lot on kind of idioms and cultural norms can create problems for multilingual learners. And one that we've had that has been just incredibly clear, we have a general education course that's about coffee, of all things, very popular, as you can imagine. And the course is taught by somebody who drinks a lot of coffee and speaks incredibly fast. And that instructor at first, yeah, it's offered at 8 a.m. No, it's offered throughout the whole day. It's that popular. It goes up until like the lab part of it goes until like 9 at night. But it's really, really popular. And because you get to brew your own coffee and learn about how to brew your own, roast your own beans and do all this stuff. But the challenge was they were getting more and more multilingual learners because it was considered such a fun and exciting course. And the outcomes were getting worse and worse and worse. Really, the grades were dropping, the average grades were dropping precipitously. And what we discovered is that there was no textbook. There was nothing written for people to look at. And the instructor at the time was not recording any of their sessions. So there was no way for people to keep track of the super fast instructor speech, and they had nothing to read, and they had nothing they could watch again. So it created a real difference between the people who could pick up what was being said and those who couldn't. And that was a specific problem that when we were able to identify it and they introduced a guide, like a little mini book that they created and allowed recording, it bounced right back up. So there's things like that you can spot in the data that you then have to dive deeper into figuring out what's happening in the actual course. Does that make sense? So the other thing we've been doing is something that I'm sure you guys are all getting into, the curricular analytics with Greg, curricularanalytics.org. And we've been looking at the complexity of curricula and looking at courses that are key courses in curricula. For example, introductory psychology, it happens to be introductory psychology is the course that has the most kind of connections. In animal science, for us, it happens to be introductory chemistry. So you see the path that students have to take, prerequisite path that students have to take. And in chemistry, it happens to be calculus. It's not even chemistry, it's calculus that has the longest path. And then you look at something like chemical engineering, and now you're really having fun because calculus is the beginning of a path that is 13 long, and we have 3 quarters per year, and you're supposed to graduate in 4 years. So 4 times 3 is 12, not 13. So you end up having a bit of a problem with that. And a lot of students don't necessarily come in ready for this calculus.
That's right.
They might have to take pre-calculus, and some even have to take kind of like before pre-calculus. So all of a sudden, you've made it virtually impossible to graduate in a timely manner. So it goes against that thing I told you at the beginning. We've got these disparities in 4-year graduation rates for minoritized, non-minoritized students, but students that are coming in with lower opportunity, who unfortunately tend to be more minoritized, are going to be in a path situation that they can't make it through. So we're trying to understand where these courses are. We're now looking at every single curriculum and trying to understand the common blockages. And a lot of them are going to be the introductory STEM courses. It's not going to be a big shocker. And that's really where we need to make our efforts, create deep efforts. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been looking at the same bubble chart that I was showing you earlier. We've been looking at over time, progression in the equity of outcomes in different types of courses over time. So just to reintroduce you again, we've got the race ethnicity up here. Here we have the year into which multiple course offerings of the same course have been offered. And we're averaging GPA outcomes for the not first gen nor low income, first gen or low income, and first gen and low income. And what you see here in the 2020 thing here, this is what I call the COVID bump. We had a COVID bump, a little bit of a COVID bump here. Here, the COVID bump wasn't as dramatic in intro chemistry, but in economics, it was there. In psychology, it kind of went up, and it's still going up. So when I look at the university overall, we had a pretty pronounced COVID bump and it's coming back down. But you can also look at individual courses and see, these are all the same GPA scale. So you can see that chemistry is using a lot more of the scale. Economics is kind of in between, and psychology is clustering more at the higher end of the outcomes. Now, grades aren't the best measure of learning. So, and also, if a lot of students are succeeding and learning what you're expecting them to learn, should you artificially open them up by introducing curves? Well, in chemistry, they use curves. In economics, they've slowly been getting away from curves, and in psychology, they don't use curves at all. So if you think about curves, the people who are going to be at the bottom are the ones coming in with the lowest opportunity in general. So a curve effectively keeps those that have lower opportunity from being able to achieve higher grades. Because if you're forcing a mean of 76, 78%, you're always going to have people who come up high and people that come up low. The people who come on the low end are likely to be the ones that came in with less opportunity to begin with. So when we do the analysis with regional opportunity and the outcomes in individual courses, we see some courses that are very, very much tied to that opportunity and many courses that have no relationship to the prior opportunity at all. The ones that tend to be the most tied are the introductory STEM courses. So again, something to think about. Okay, were there questions about that? Sorry, about any of this? Okay, so I've shown you what we do at the university-wide level. I've shown you some of the things that we're trying to do here at the kind of department level, and we're working on something now called Know Your Department. But now I'm going to show you what we give faculty, individual faculty, to try to help them think about what they're doing. Now, what I'm going to show you is still, even after several years, I still consider it a work in progress because we're showing way too much information. We need to figure out a way to focus the information so we really pick the things that are, I'll use the word actionable. Actionable, I'm a little bit annoyed at that word, but we're trying to figure out the data that will inspire some positive outcomes. And we're slowly getting there, but it's taking us a long time to figure this out. So what we do with faculty is we have a tool called Know Your Students. And Know Your Students is effectively a dashboard. It was, a lot of the work has been funded by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Inclusive Excellence Grant that we got. And I, along working with my collaborators here, we tried to build a system that had a lot of data, which is really that awareness piece. We tried to bring in student voices and teaching information, background information to try to help understand how you might address some of the things that you learn about here in the awareness. And then we continue to build in tools to help faculty, in a sense, do their own mini research on what's going on with their students. And I'll tell you a little bit more about some of these in a moment. But the idea is really to put the faculty at the center. The idea is to put you in your class where you're teaching in the center of this information and the center of this ecosystem. And the kinds of things we show you are things like, for courses that you are teaching or have taught since your career at the university, what are the class size or courses you're about to teach? What are the transfer, how many students are transfer students? How many are academically distressed, repeaters, the experience of your students with our campus? This has now been changed to multilingual learner students, the first gen URM and minoritized and low income students, first generation, low income, minoritized, international, and percentage female. Oops, sorry, and percentage female. Now, this stuff is in a slightly different color because we have a basic version and then we have the version if you've been trained. And what we do for training, we realized when we first released this to faculty that some faculty were looking at their data and saying, oh, I have a lot of transfer students this year. Transfer students do poorly. We didn't want them to start the year by saying, oh, this class is not going to go so well this year because I see that I have 40% transfer students and transfer students never do that well in my class. So we didn't want that to happen. So we have some training, and we've done the training in person, but now we've also created a Canvas 30 to 40 minute experience that you can go through and learn about implicit bias, learn about FERPA regulations, learn about the basics of the context of the university, some of the data that I showed you earlier, so that you have a sense of how your class fits in. And we don't give you any information for groups of less than 10. Okay, so this doesn't work very well for those that teach small classes. But we also allow you to pick any course that you want and see if your students have already taken it and how they've done in those courses. So it'll automatically populate the courses that most of your students have already taken in this interface here, and you can pop in the one you want, and then it shows you the grade distribution of your students, and it shows you the grade outcomes and how long ago they took it, within a year or more than a year. The other thing it'll show you is the campus experience. So what this means is how many units and how many terms have your students had at our campus. So this gives you a sense of, do you need to tell them about tutoring centers? Do you need to tell them about advising? Do you need to tell them about other things? Gives you a sense of that, both for transfers and for freshmen. Of course, it tells you the majors and their level, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. It also tells you about the number of courses your students are taking and how many units they're taking. And it also gives you a sense of what are the most popular concurrent courses being taken and what are the most popular prior term courses that your students took. And then you can look at your whole history of grade distributions for your course. And probably most controversially, you can look at the gaps between groups that you have taught over time. Okay. And this you can say transfer, non-transfer, minoritized first-gen low income versus non-minoritized, non-first-gen, non-low income. You can look at a lot of these different combinations. And of course, if we don't have enough data to show you because there's not 10 students, we show you something, innocuous. You don't get to see that data, but you can kind of see what's been happening. And this allows you to get a sense of, are trends staying consistent? Is there a lot of variability? What's going on with my classes? And just recently we added those bubble charts that I showed you earlier about the course, but this is for everybody that's taught the course that you're teaching, merged together so that you can't, so it's not easy for you to say, oh, I did better than so-and-so. It's not done that way, but it's done to show you in the last 5 years, what do things look like? And you can see here, for example, in this class, in the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, things were a lot higher because this is one of those classes that was strongly affected by COVID,
Right.
Meaning they changed dramatically their assessment practices and everything jumped up. Okay, so that's kind of this is the one that we just recently added. The other thing that we can do is we've taken Zoom transcripts, and we can tell you, we can do an analysis of the words that were used in the class and also who spoke. So if you had interactions between different people, and we can do the same thing now with also just pure audio files. We can tell you how much are you speaking as an instructor, how much are the students speaking to each other, how much silence is there. We can also have you bring in your grade book, and you can see, did test 1 and test 2 disproportionately affect females compared to males? Did my homework score disproportionately affect first-gen students versus non-first-gen students? You can get a sense of that. And this is an example of the audio analysis. This is the transcript analysis, this is the audio analysis. We've also just recently added something that we call the classroom inclusion survey that allows you to see if it looks at belonging, it looks at ability to feeling that you can contribute to the class, feeling that you're heard, and feeling that you as an individual in a cultural group are acknowledged. So it allows you to measure those things, and then you can see this is how the minoritized students rated you on these things versus the non-minoritized students. You can see this is how the females rated you versus the males. You can see how, and it's based on their student self-identity that they've given on some of those measures. So it's a way for us to share back with you, are there differences in the way people are feeling in your class and their sense of belonging, feeling included in your class? We're analyzing right now about 3,000 students survey responses, and we're starting to do it pre-post in some of our larger classes. And I think as we finalize the kind of the constructs, we'll do it on an even larger scale. This happens to be some screens from the training course. It's a Canvas course I was telling you earlier. Right now we have about 1,100 faculty using Know Your Students, the basic, and we have about 55, 60 that have the full. And so because the one-on-one training takes way too long, we're about to release the online course to try to see if that makes a difference and try to get more people to get the full access. But we want to simplify that tool. So we're starting to build in a narrative into it that would highlight certain key metrics and then allow you to go to what I showed you if you wanted to go deeper. Because we realized that what we're doing now is just overwhelming. There's just way too much stuff, and it's hard to know as an instructor, what are you going to do with that? So we're trying to figure out how we can focus you on 2 or 3 concrete things that you can do rather than bombarding you with all the information. So with that, I'm done with the formal presentation, and I'm happy to have any kind of conversations or questions.
Thank you so much. This is full of information, and normally I think we get not just the recording but the presentation. I know you sent it probably, but they'll keep it at the University of Arizona, because I think there are a few slides I want to go back to. In any case, who has any questions for Professor Molinaro? Saying, I think you're talking, but you're not. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go, Sarah. Your hand.
Hi. Yeah. Hello. Thank you for the talk. Really interesting work. I'm actually leading a similar initiative to the last one that you presented, where I'm in student success and retention innovation. We're partnering with our Office of Instructional Assessment to try and give faculty some data about equity gaps in their course outcomes, and then some supports to redesign those gateway courses and teach them again. So I would love to learn, from your experience, and especially any lessons learned about really connecting with faculty around the data. You kind of touched on that at the very end, but if you could spend a little more time kind of talking about that aspect of the work, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So first, there's trying to avoid any major misinterpretations of the data, right? Or trying to help faculty even just be aware that we all have biases. And when you look at certain information, it's important to take it with a grain of salt, basically, to take it with a student empathy kind of perspective. So that's the first piece that we're trying to figure out how to get that kind of training, have multiple ways of getting that kind of exposure for the faculty, right, to that information. When we think about how faculty interpret what they see and what they do with it, what we've noticed is that there are layers of actions that are very simple and concrete. Like, for example, if you realize you have a lot of students that are newer to the university, we can offer, we can help you from the Teaching and Learning Center. We can help you think about the kinds of things that you might want to share with the students. What's harder now is we're trying to figure out what we would do, what we are going to do with the classroom inclusion information. Because the classroom inclusion information, let's say you come back and you realize that the students who are minoritized don't feel able to contribute to the class or don't feel like they're heard. What are we going to be able to do there? And so we have quite a few aligned workshops and even learning communities in our Teaching and Learning Center to kind of help guide people to some of these things. But I'll tell you that it's still hard to get decent traction because if you really want to get down to it, the incentive system is not aligned with some of these desires for people to be more inclusive in their classes and to spend time on their pedagogy and fine-tuning their pedagogy. So we're not really special. We haven't figured it out. But I think it's really important to take advantage of your institutional analysis capabilities. It's really important to take advantage of your teaching and learning offerings. It's really important to think about how there can be different modalities for receiving some kind of training and instruction in how to use the data. And I'll tell you, just making resources available doesn't do it. I mean, a few people will take advantage of that, but many will not. Most will not. So we are trying to figure out if, for example, we can get, I showed you at the end, like the transcript tool and looking at your grade books and trying to understand that. We're trying to figure out, can we help an instructor who has shown that they are reflective? Can we somehow get that recognized in their merit and promotion packet? So that's kind of been our long-term goal. It's incredibly slow, but we kind of know the behaviors that we'd like to see. We kind of know the kind of empathy that we'd like, that we think would be beneficial to the whole system. But the incentives are not yet aligned. So the Senate has been very reticent to put any kind of requirements that you be a reflective practitioner, right? So imagine if all of a sudden for your merit and promotion, you had to demonstrate that you were a reflective practitioner teaching your courses. And they're just like, hell no, we don't want to see that. That's too much work. And so, we're working on rewards in terms of like awards, which a lot of campuses do. We're trying to build opportunities for research in our scholarship of teaching and learning community, which can also bring in research funding. And so therefore a different type of currency of prestige and award. It's probably not the best answer, but I guess we're approaching it from lots of different angles. Yeah, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And fundamentally, you need to figure out how to have this be valued.
Yeah, you've built a really broad infrastructure, and we're really focusing in on a much narrower piece of it. But the one thing that we do have going for us is we do have stipends from the provost to recruit faculty who are really interested in doing some of this work. And then hopefully we can get some recognition, for that effort. But thank you so much. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah. So Marco, you have 4 minutes, as you told us before. You have to leave in 3 minutes now. So someone else, anybody else wants to ask a quick question and have Marco answer quickly. All right.
Sorry, somebody just delivered a package.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this.
No, go ahead. Do you have another question? I'm happy to answer. That was just.
I don't hear anybody. I don't see anybody's hand. So.
Yes, I would like to just ask a very quick question. I'm not sure if it is quick, but Aslam Garabai from University of Central Florida. I'm helping the Dean of Engineering and Computer Science here with some data analytics. I'm a faculty member, but I'm just working on this project for graduate college student success initiative. And one thing that I think I hear you mention that the first courses that the students take, they tend to have some more like a failure in that first course if that's not, there was a jolt. I was wondering if you have also looked at what kind of impact that has had in their long-term success or retention, and what kind of things that you have put in place to make some changes to it, maybe some adjusting expectations, maybe some course alignments or so on.
So thank you for the question. That kind of shock, the thing that we've been trying to do to try to support. So first of all, we've looked at who's retained, right? So yeah, I showed you some data about, we have a greater loss from the people who come from less opportunity. And I could have shown you a different type of graph that would show you that the people who do poorly in those introductory courses have a much higher likelihood of leaving. That's the other thing I could show you. So really the focus has been on targeting and improving those introductory courses. And actually in chemistry, we took a curriculum coming out of your institution, the chemical thinking coming out of Vicente Talenker, and tried to bring it over here. Unfortunately, we were allowed to do a 1-year trial, and then the chemistry department blocked it because they didn't want so much attention being given to non-majors. But now, 4 years later, it's likely coming back. So changing curriculum is a long-term process, and it depends a lot on the people who are running that curriculum at that moment in time. So if you're having struggles at first, just wait for the chair to change, and things, you're in a different situation, potentially. So really the primary thing is changing those courses, right? Really making them more holistic, more inclusive, pedagogies that are taking into account that context is very important. Relevance is very important to our students. And so if you make a curriculum that's totally separate from the main parts of the, what they see in the world, happening in the world, they're not as likely to succeed. So I think we're really looking at curricular change as a fundamental piece that we have to work hard to do.
Great. Thank you so much. Great presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you. If you have any other questions, just let me, I
was going to ask if you're willing maybe to answer others, if people will email you, if that's possible. Okay.
Here's my email. Just don't expect a super fast response.
Nope.
But I'm happy to answer.
Never do.
And I would love to hear more about what you guys are doing at some point. I'll talk to Greg about trying to get some of that information.
Great.
I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and
Thank you.
talk to you guys soon.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Hello guys, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
How is it going?
Going pretty good. How about you?
Good, good. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Your microphone is
Yeah, it's turned on. I'll just close the door. Thanks.
How is it going?
I saw you already slept.
Oh, we have to stop the recording now. 1 second. 1 second.